On today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers, we are going to be joined by Joe and Stevie from the Broadway Block Podcast for part 2 of our 2-part crossover episode here. We'll be talking Ranger trade targets, also the need that the Rangers have to upgrade at right wing, sharing some stories as well from watching the Rangers in the playoffs over the past couple of seasons, really since we've been fans of this team, and specifically going to talk about some stories from us watching Game 7 of the Rangers versus Penguins last year in the playoffs. As it turns out, Joe and Stevie were actually at that game, so they've got some fun stories to share from their experience with everything that happened at Madison Square Garden. Of course, Artemi Panarin knocking out the Penguins in Game 7 last season. Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 762 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And so, like I mentioned, we're just going to talk with Stevie and with Joe here from the Broadway Block Podcast. They do a fantastic job with their show, and not going to waste any more time. Just going to dive right into it, play part 2 of our conversation. Part 1 was actually yesterday's episode, so I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. You can watch them in either order, but just enjoy this special crossover edition, a New York Ranger podcast crossover edition. Yeah, I'm glad you guys both brought up Trocheck, because he's another one. And even you guys, seem to have slightly different views on, his role with the Rangers and his future with the Rangers. And, that's something that I hadn't really thought of, Joe, where, is he kind of in Filip Chytil's way? Does he have, or does Filip Chytil, rather, have more upside than Vincent Trocheck? I've always liked Trocheck. I've always liked his game. He actually, and I've said this on the podcast, even before he came to the Rangers, he was one of my favorite non-Rangers in the league. Just like those guys that are kind of Swiss Army knives and just kind of like a B+ at like every area of the game. And I think Trocheck applies there. But by that same token, obviously the Rangers are going to be uptight against the salary cap. They've got some tough decisions to make this offseason. And will that Trocheck contract, which is 7 years, is that eventually going to get in the way of them doing other things that they want to do? And of course, I want to say Trocheck has a no move clause. I've got cap friendly here. Yeah, he does. So he'll be on the Rangers for as long as he wants to be there. And I know a lot of people fixate on the fact that it's 7 years, but I think the reason the Rangers did that is, to keep the average annual value down. If you give a guy a couple more years, then he might be a little bit more willing to take a little bit less per year, for the long-term security and everything. But Trocheck, I'm glad he's here, but I can also see the other side of that where it's like, man, it might be time to put Filip Chytil into a top 6 role, and there isn't really any room for him unless, of course, you were to put him on, say, like the right wing. I mean, have you guys ever thought about that? Because this is something I used to talk about on this podcast, the idea of moving Chytil to the wing. And I've kind of just given up on it because the Rangers never do it. So I've kind of moved on from it. But I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. Like Chytil on the right wing, second line. I mean, could that be an option? Especially since that's an area where the Rangers are kind of thin right now is right wing.
Well, anything could be an option. One last point on Drury is that my only other knock on him is that not shoring up that first line has really caused Gallant to have to, with his role, come back and try to figure out the lines day in and day out, which has really given us a revolving door, which has given us no consistency. So Chris Drury over the offseason, I feel obviously we needed another center in there, that position. Not locking up a right winger there has caused us a lot of problems. As for Chytil playing wing, I feel like we have other options, I would prefer, centers are so valuable that I would prefer to move Kreider or Laffy to that right wing position, if anything, rather than Filip Chytil, because he's always in the right place. He's got good moves. He's been playing good defense. So I wouldn't mess with him. Maybe I might have considered it at the offseason last year. Maybe he is an option. But as of him playing right now, and after that Hurricane series last year, I'd be he's made to play center, and I think he really needs to stay in that center position. The last thing is with Trocheck too as well. I will give Drury that we were dog shit on the faceoffs last year. So Trocheck is a face-off man. So him bringing in Trocheck was to help the face-off. Did Drury see the power play going as poorly as it's gone this year? No. Also, would we be even considering Chytil for the second center position if all those goals that Trocheck hit the post on for the first 3 months went in? Maybe not. Maybe we wouldn't even be having this discussion. Yeah. But as for Chytil to the wing, I think he's just got to stay in the center position.
If I'm correct, we tried it a few seasons ago. I think that the glut that we've had, it's so strange how it happens, right? So we go from being so flush in that department to being bare. A lot of it, in my opinion, rides on the fact that Kravy really hasn't been as advertised. Now, there's a bunch of fans out there that would have my head for even saying that. And I feel like, what we've done is given him another opportunity. And there's been moments, but if I'm Drury, I'm finding a willing participant and keeping him on ice to not embarrass himself or us as an organization for any longer. Because, if you can get a return for Kravy, I think you do it, because he's essentially soaking up what could be a more capable right wing. And who's to say that a guy like Gustav Nyquist wouldn't, fit in beautifully on that second, third line, where we could elevate a guy like Kakko, because, for what it's worth, Kakko's play with the kid line has not been missed on me. I feel like Kakko is, the glue to those guys, because we've seen different variations of Laugh and Chytil, but it really is when the three of them come together, and it's hard to identify what exactly that is. But we've also seen Kakko go up and play with the top guys and also perform really well there. So I think a lot of this is the lack of someone else to being able to gel on those lines. Kravy's not it. Everybody's up in arms when it's a guy like VC or Goody. I think VC or Goody's limit is on that third, fourth line, where they can be their most effective and be difficult to play against. If Chytil slides to the wing, then that means Goody's the full-time third center, right? And then, your fourth line center, we've already waived Brodzinski, and, Carpenter's really not pushing the needle for me. So my thing is, having the rest of that, like Joe had alluded to, the rest of that fall into line once you can shore up that role. And if it's Kakko, great. Just, you got to get somebody that can stay on the second line, and it creates that domino effect of what to do. One thing that Joe had also mentioned about Trocheck is, not only is he a face-off guy, the commitment's there, but you can also see the direction that is obvious with the team, that, the commitment to Trocheck, the commitment to guys like Goodrow, they want sandpaper players that are hard to play against. I think Nyquist checks those boxes for me as well, especially being somebody who can contribute maybe 20 a year. And he was pretty noticeable in the game that we played against the Blue Jackets. And, we had someone on our show that had mentioned it well before the beat writers were talking about Nyquist. And as soon as he said it, I was like, why didn't I think of this guy? He's someone who's hard to play against. He goes to the net, kind of like Goodrow, kind of like Trocheck. And we've seen the commitment to sandpaper players in recent memory now. So I would be looking towards somebody like that, where we can elevate from within and maybe stick a guy like Kakko firmly on that top line. As much as I enjoy watching the kid line do what they've been doing recently, has been absolutely fantastic.
Just want to take a minute to let you guys know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On, because they're the #1 sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Yeah, Kako, I feel like long term we might end up seeing a reunion of him with Mika and Kreider, because that was obviously clicking pretty nice, and that was the best we've seen Kako play since he's come into the NHL, and he's doing well with the kid line too. But man, it looked like he was ready to just really take off when he was with Mika and Kreider, and I think long term too. I'll ask you guys about this too, because I've always kind of resisted the idea of putting Panarin with Mika. I mean, they're so good anyway, and they're so dangerous whenever they're even on opposite lines. I don't know that you need to kind of like overstack the top line, especially when, depth at times has been something of a concern for this team. I'd rather have them on two different lines. But your thoughts on that? I mean, Panarin and Mika, do you want them on the same line? Do you want them on different lines? What's the ideal setup there for you guys?
For me, I like them on separate lines because they both bring a different aspect of play. Like, obviously on paper, it sounds good. Like Panarin's a passer. Like you saw him when he was with Chicago. He was always looking to ditch it to Kaner for that goal. And you would assume Mika would be ready to swoop into that role. But they kind of play, they spread the ice. They kind of are used to quarterbacking the play. So it's kind of like you don't really need two quarterbacks out there at the same time. And with us, with our line issues, you kind of need someone on that second line to quarterback that and keep that moving. So for me, have we seen it? Would it be great if it was a great first line? Yeah, I'd love it. But we can't. And going back to it, I don't think you can get something going and stay with that, because good teams that win over time have the same first line for years in and years out. It's years of consistency. So I don't think we're stuck on these lines until we find that first line right winger. But Mika and Panarin, I think they should be on separate lines. Steve, what do you think?
It's funny, and we had mentioned this a few episodes ago as well, that why is it that whenever we are in need of a spark, that's Gallant's go-to move? And if I'm honest, they dominate puck possession, but a lot of it, to me, has to revolve around the opponent, because there's a lot that I'm sure goes into the Gallant line change fiasco that everybody references. And to me, it has to be if you're playing a deeper team like the Canes, maybe you need them separated because that they can shut down a top line. And after that, what do you have? So to me, it has probably a lot more to do, in my opinion, with the matchups and knowing who's going to be on the opposite line from you. I think on paper, Mika and Panarin makes the most amount of sense. I mean, that is your power play unit. You put Fox and Keandre together when you want the same little boost from the back end. So there's half of me that wants that commitment to just do it. But I think you nailed it, man, that without that number one right wing and without the consistency from the rest of the line, it has that trickle-down effect where, because we don't have that number one right winger, where it's just a no-brainer, that's really where it gets difficult. And again, if a guy like Kravy was performing well, maybe we're not having this conversation. If a guy like Trocheck is netting all those goals, and, maybe would have never seen Panarin bump up to that line, because that 13 more goals or however many posts that Trocheck hit, that would have been 13 more apples for bread, man. And, you would have no argument to change up that pairing. So, for me, it has a lot to do with the opponent, in my opinion. And I feel like if there was that no-brainer decision on the right side, that the line juxtaposition wouldn't be happening nearly as much, because, we've seen it on the power play when Gallant has one thing figured out, and he'll stick with it and he'll roll with it for the long term. One question I wanted to spin to you, John, and we don't have to answer it next, I'm sure you have a thought in mind, is how have you felt about Jaroslav Halak? Because when we chatted last, we saw a completely different Yaro than we have been recently.
Yeah, no, obviously feeling a lot better. I know he's winning games at a high clip. I don't have the exact number in front of me. I know he's won at least the last three in a row here. And something that really impressed me in the game against Vegas, and I got to shout out to you, Joe, first, because you mentioned that sometimes the decision whether to go with Halak or Igor can be a little strange. That one I thought was strange too, because you're looking at the schedule. Okay, we play Vegas, good team. They've cooled off a little bit, but it's obviously a very good team. And then you've got 9 straight days off if you're the Rangers. So the thought that they would put Halak into that game never even crossed my mind. But I kind of see why they did it, because if he doesn't play that game, he's going to go probably about a month without playing in a hockey game. So it makes a little bit of sense from that perspective. But the thing I love about, Halak coming up big in that game is that I think a knock that you could still have on Halak is, okay, he's played a little bit better recently, but he's beating the Blue Jackets and the Canadians. They tend to only put him out there against the not so good teams. Well, now he just beat a team that's tied for first place in its division. So very impressive performance there. And I think, coming into the season, whether it was going to be Halak or anybody else, if you're a Ranger fan, Georgie's leaving, he's getting traded. So whoever the new backup is going to be, it's kind of like, all right, well, let's just get somebody that can give us a chance. You feel good about having an opportunity to win the game if he's starting. Halak's doing more than that lately, man. He's making some great saves. And that game against Vegas, bit of a slow start by the Rangers. He made some really tough saves early, allowed them to kind of take control in the second period and go on to win. So I'm really happy with what I'm seeing from him. And I can tell that the Ranger players were certainly happy as well because, after the game, you guys probably saw, they were all hugging him and congratulating him. And I'm sure they recognize that he got off to a really tough start with his new team this year too. So, what a 180, and obviously feeling a heck of a lot better about Halak these days than at the start of the season.
5 straight, John. That's what he's at.
There we go. Not too shabby. Yeah, not too shabby for somebody that was like 6-1 or whatever it was. But
it looks like the locker room loves him. Like he stayed in the tunnel just to give everybody a shout out, and it seems like the guys really like him in there. So that's actually really awesome.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's a really tight-knit locker room. That's something that I've talked about on my pod. I'm sure you guys have mentioned it as well. Those guys have each other's back. They care about each other, and the fact that he's come in and seemingly fit into the culture and the environment. Really good stuff there for sure. And nice to know it's still a pretty tight-knit bunch. I did want to mention, though, we've kind of been talking all throughout the episode here. We kind of, all three of us, I think, at one time or another have mentioned the trade deadline or mentioned somebody that could be on the move. So I got to know, is there somebody that you think the Rangers will trade for, somebody that they should trade for, a personal favorite for either of you guys? Anything you want to throw out there as far as the deadline is concerned?
Well, for me, obviously, I'm always intrigued. I'm a New Yorker, so I just want to be obviously Tarasenko out there with Mika or something like that. Or Kaner, that would be great. But does it make sense financially and long term, and with the where they are at in their contracts? Obviously, Kaner we could re-sign, but are we going to be able to sign him? No. So I don't think we're going to go after a big fish, and then that falls into the what teams are willing to give up who. I don't really have anybody in mind per se, because it's all really what teams you got to look at the teams that are doing poorly. Who does Arizona have? Who does the Sharks have? Who are they willing to give up? And teams like that, even the Blue Jackets, Blue Jackets signed Johnny Hockey. Are they willing to give up people for a reasonable price? And then you go up to Montreal, they're doing poorly. They have good nights, but it seems like they're in a rebuild. So how much are they willing to give up? So I think you just have to find the right person. And if it doesn't happen, trade partner, then I think you just kind of continue with the season that we're having and you rebuild in the off season a little bit more.
I think the list of people.
Sorry.
I think the list of people that I don't want to trade for is longer than the list of people that I'm looking at.
I agree.
I think the Blue Jackets game was pretty telling. That guy Gavrikov, diving after pucks, he reminded me a lot of Tyler Motte. He goes out, hurts himself on a block shot, comes out a shift later, blocks a shot, hits it off the same spot, and then there's rumor a week later that we've actually kicked tires on him. And Tyler Motte actually, has been sidelined with a broken finger in Ottawa, so they might not be as in love with him. There's that recency bias in the room as far as maybe they're a little less attached, because I think. We had the Ottawa Senators, Joe and I, pegged as one of the most improved teams in the league going into the season. And, they seem to be looking on any other year where they might be looking to add via subtraction and get rid of some guys for a higher price tag. So, Gavrikov stood out to me. Hardworking players like that can flush out those bottom roles, because either way you look at it, if you lock up one side of the ice on either the top end or the bottom end, that will at least let the pieces fall into place for this glaring hole on the winger. So it's got to be a wing no matter what you do, or a Swiss Army knife type of player in Tyler Motte, who you also already know what you're going to get. And come on, let's be honest. What would the price tag really be? A fifth, a fourth? I'd do that all day, every single time, and twice on a Sunday.
Sammy Blay, hopefully.
Could we kill two birds with one stone?
Yeah, can we figure that one out?
Yeah, undoubtedly, unfortunately. And And somebody else that that has been talked about a lot and is also in that same breath of, it would be a fortune to re-sign them. But Timo Meier is an attractive looking piece, and it depends on what you're willing to give up, and it also depends on the perceived value of what the conversation starts at if you're another team, because it's typically a market driven by not what we can offer, but what can the rest of the league offer. And if there's a prettier package out there for the Sharks, you can probably understand that they'll take it. Especially you said Sammy Blais, and I already said Kravtsov, but not to rip on the guy any further, but you got to get something for that guy, because moving forward, he's going to weigh any contract he can get with us against his KHL out clause that he still has. And if I believe he's only signed for that extra 1 year, I think that is this season. So it's like you're in a really difficult spot with this guy either way. So it would be, in my opinion, the best interest to rid ourselves of a guy like that, acquire some depth players that are going to, try hard for you, like the ones that I've mentioned. And a Timo Meier, to me, really just checks all those boxes because, he serves as a rental, obviously, but if he proves to be the player that he's proven he can be elsewhere, if he can fit into the Rangers, because that's really what it always comes down to is, we can trade for players, sure, but can they have that instant chemistry like we saw last year from Motte and Vetrano, who were actually in the highest contributing efforts out of any deadline acquisition from any team last season? I feel like a guy like Meier is a guy that you move players out for, and even if they're fan favorites, you find a way to keep a guy like Timo, in my opinion.
$9 million.
With the Sharks. Oh, go ahead. What's up?
Oh, sorry. My last point. The only thing about Timo is I heard he's in the range of a 9 to 9.5 million contract he's looking for after.
That's for a qualifying offer, right? So you have to also understand that, you had also mentioned it too, John, is the length of that commitment. Maybe we can find a way to make it more of a $7.5-8 million contract if we're going to commit to him. And then the lineup is basically set in stone where, like Joe alluded to, now you just let them cook for a few years and build that chemistry and become that undeniable team. But this would also require getting rid of some players that we're all big fans of. And who that player is specifically, it's actually in our best interest if some of these guys kind of cool off, because they're going to be due for a hefty raise if they continue the point pace they're on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Timo Meier. I said in a recent episode, because I've done a couple of trade deadline, centric episodes, and if I could just push a button and any player that's going to be available at the trade deadline comes to the Rangers, I mean, he would be my guy. But man, you look at the fact that it would be, I don't know how they would re-sign him. You'd have to shuffle all kinds of money off the books and pretty much unload. And
then you're locked in. And then you're locked into some big contracts. Then
even more so than they already are.
Yeah.
So that's going to be tough. And just the fact that he's got to be at or near the very top of the list as far as guys that could end up being on the move, at the trade deadline season this year. And man, if they do make him available, and I actually talked with JD Young not too long ago. He hosts Locked On Sharks. He put it at 60-40 that the Sharks will trade Meier as opposed to hang on to him. But man, teams are just gonna be lining up around the block, just throwing offers at the Sharks. And look, the Sharks, I'm with you. I feel like that's the kind of player. He's still only like 26 years old. You re-sign him and you build around him. But if they do move him, my God, there's got to be 8, 10, 12 teams looking to bring him in. So, it's an interesting situation to track for sure. And as for Tyler Motte, man, I love the idea of bringing him back. He did a great job for this team last year. He was out there in free agency forever in the offseason. And I think a lot of us were hopeful that, 1 or 2 year deal with Tyler Motte. Yeah, let's do this. Ends up signing the 1 year deal with Ottawa. And as you guys mentioned, Ottawa's not contending. It doesn't look like they're going to be a playoff team. That being the case, I would imagine they would look to move him. And yeah, fourth rounder probably is about right. I think, that sounds about appropriate. So yeah, I love the idea, but we'll see. We'll see if they can make it happen. But yeah, Timo Meier, he would be big time for sure. Just want to take a minute to let you guys know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat, but don't want all the fat and calories? Then you've got to try a Built Bar. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievably delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 12-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. You can thank us later. And I think the other thing, too, as far as the trade deadline, if you just want to break it down as far as positions are concerned, we've identified right wing as like, the biggest need that this Ranger team has, and I don't think it's even close. I think when you look position by position, that's the area of need. But I'd be cool with like, a pretty significant right winger, as well as, maybe a depth defenseman, somebody that could be either the 6th or 7th guy. If the Rangers do that and they bring in, 2 or maybe 3 pieces to play those positions, I think we're looking at a pretty good trade deadline. But any closing thoughts as far as the deadline is concerned, or anybody that you might want to see the Rangers bring in? And Joe,
it's got to be right winger. It's got to be someone that can play right wing. And like I said, it'd be nice to have a right winger that we can build consistency with, because those teams that are competing for cups and stuff like that, like they have the same lines. Like look at the back-to-back Stanley Cup champion Lightning. That first line was deadly for them. And when they didn't have somebody on them, they were a different team. So we got to get some right winger. We talked on our show briefly that we thought a veteran defenseman was important. I think more important even than that is finding the right winger, because I think Harper kind of like holds that shadow for right now, that he could be that 7th defenseman, and you touched on it with Jones or Robertson coming in later in the future. So I'd rather wager more and try to get rid of some of these other guys that we're gonna have to pay or something like that, and just get that right winger we need.
On the topic of building around a guy like Meier and trying to find the way to sign him, I firmly believe, like Joe had said about the consistency on the top lines and building that chemistry over time, I am a much bigger advocate of stripping the bottom 6 of players that really haven't shown what they can do. Not to say all of them, but there are a lot of replacement level players around for who we have. You mentioned Ma on a 1-year bid. There is always next year's unrestricted free agents that will much more likely sign to an attractive team if you can create an attractive landing spot. And just with the revolving door that we've had, Gautier's had a fine year, sure. Even VC on that $800K, Harper, these are all guys you can afford to get rid of and replace pretty inexpensively if you couldn't already do that from what you have in-house. So that's where I would sit as far as the deadline. If you do swing for a guy, it's got to be Meier, right? Because it doesn't make sense to go out and blow all that cap space or draft picks or assets or whatever it would take to get a guy like Kaner or Tarasenko. It would make
Plus,
much
they're
more
older.
sense.
They're older. Like you're
100%.
right. Timo is right in his prime. I think you guys both are 100% right on that. Like he would be someone you would invest in.
Yeah, and like I mentioned with the commitment to Trocheck and Goodrow, I mean, there's commitment all over this roster as far as Fox and Trouba, and don't forget Igor is going to be due in a couple seasons for an upgrade, and you can't afford to lose a guy like Igor. So I would be much happier with a team that is worth building around and kind of plugging in those bottom roles, because the 4th line this year has just not been it for me. And depending on who we decide to slide down to that 3rd line, it's been pretty hit or miss as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, talking about, the cap crunch and everything going on, and, this guy needs a new contract and all that good stuff. It's crazy because after the extensions to VZ and Harper, do you guys know how many UFAs are remaining, like on the Ranger roster right now? How many impending UFAs? Like off the top of your head? It's crazy.
Do you?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know.
So there's only 2. It's Sammy Blais and Jaroslav Halak. That's it. Those are the only UFAs. Oh. So pretty interesting, yeah. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the Rangers do at the trade deadline for sure. I mean, I'm up for doing another episode then with you guys if you're up for it. But there was a question 100%. I wanted to ask both of you, kind of changing gears here a little bit. So I did this episode, after the Ranger playoff run concluded last year, and obviously they had that crazy series win against the Penguins, and Panarin scores in Game 7, the overtime winner. I asked listeners to write in and just kind of give me stories about, who they were with and how did they react when Panarin scored that overtime Game 7 winner. So I want to put the question to you guys. I never mind reminiscing about this moment, the Rangers eliminating the Penguins. So let me know, who were you with? How did you celebrate? Spare no details. Let me know how it went.
I was with this guy.
There we go. All right.
And his father.
Okay.
Papa Steve was there. And it was a great game, man. We had been up on our feet the whole time. Jari was back for it, so we were trying to get the crowd into Pens fans got at Igor, so we were really trying to get at Jari for that Game 7, really let him know it was a hostile environment and that we were ready to come be alive. And when it happened, you could see the play develop, and after Panarin scored that, the building shook like no other. Walking down the tunnels from at the end of the game, everyone is lit, screaming as loud as they possibly could, saying we want the cup. It was one of the best environments that you could possibly be in, and especially being in MSG, one of the greatest buildings of all sports franchise. You couldn't have asked for anything better.
The streets were insane, and it made me realize how devastating it would have been if we had lost that game. Because the amount of pent up emotion that was happening, that was pouring into the streets. We go just down the road, and there's a group of fans mocking the Penguins horn, the bam bam bam, and then a bunch of people in high pitched voices going, "Let's go Pens!" And it was just this culmination of everyone finally being able to rip on that team and to do it with kind of the same arrogance that we've come accustomed to. And it just, Joe touched on the Igor thing, but the whole building wanted to make that game uncomfortable. And there was a really sinking feeling when we were down a goal. And I had texted my wife. She called the first goal scorer, the game winner. She called both of those players. And with about 2 minutes remaining before it happened, I was like, dude, Andrew Kopp is about to blow the roof off this place. Somehow squeaks the puck out to Mika to tie it. And that was just it was almost like it was meant to be. And to have, obviously, my best bud there with me, we both lost our voice. The whole arena was shaking, as he said. And it was just, how about you, John? Where were you for that game?
Yeah, man, that's awesome. You guys were there. That's so cool. I've never been to a Stanley Cup playoff game, so that's definitely something that's on the list. I've been to the Garden a bunch of times, just never for the playoffs. But yeah, I was at home, watching it. My wife and I had just welcomed our first child, just about a month or two before that. Oh, thank you so much, man. Thank you. But my mom was visiting, giving us a hand a little bit. She's a big Ranger fan too. And, my wife, she was upstairs with our daughter, Daniela. And, I believe they were both asleep at that point. When Panarin scored that goal, though, because I'm just sitting there, I'm paralyzed watching this because it's such a stressful, unforgiving environment. You score the next goal, you advance, they score, you're done. It's pretty crazy to think about. And when they scored, I wish I could tell you I ran around my house and I just collapsed. That was such an emotionally draining series. The fans were just at each other's throats. I'm so sick of the Penguins. I'm sure you guys are sick of the Penguins and that core that's been in place with them for 30 years. And it was the exact opposite of what happened when Stepan scored all those years ago against the against the Caps in overtime. When that happened, I went nuts. With this one, it was just pure concentrated relief. They're done. They're out of the playoffs. They can go cry about it. We're moving on. And another 3-1 series come back up against the Penguins. Just such a relief and such a great feeling.
It almost felt like the end of an era for the Pens too, which made me extra happy because we didn't know if Malkin was coming back. You didn't know about, obviously you knew Crosby was coming back, but everything, question marks were up in the air. The only thing I wish I could show that too is any free agent we're trying to get or any trade person to be if you could win in New York, you can go win somewhere else, but if you win in New York, you're legendary.
Yes.
That was a legendary moment from Panarin, which of course we, as New Yorkers, we did the next thing to Panarin the whole series. Like, oh, he had a disappointing playoff run with us, even though he had that Game 7 winner. But that's the most New Yorker thing we could do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was rough for Panarin. But that, like, if I could show someone that energy, if there was a way to show that from that game, like, and be like, come to New York, come play for New York, take a discount, because we never get anybody that takes a discount. They go to the Pens and take a discount, but New York, everyone's like, all right, I'm in New York, cash my check. So if I could just show that.
Or they go to Florida and avoid all the state income tax.
Oh yeah, the taxes. Thank you.
$2 million deal or a Bergeron contract. Which I still think the NHL should investigate. It's so funny that we have opposite stories, John, because to give some insight to the Stepan goal, my wife now, we were newly dating, and we were at her parents' house, and they had kind of like singled me out the 2 nights before and was like, listen, we wake up at 3 a.m. to go to work. There's going to be no screaming tonight for this stupid hockey game, okay? And I was like, you're trying to Scouts honor, sir. I promise we'll be. And when I tell you I had to silently, I was like paralyzed and couldn't react, and just all this, it was completely polar opposite, and you got to do that for the Panarin goals. That's super funny, man.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, that the one other reason why I kind of waited to celebrate, and I don't know if this happened with you guys either, but the Panarin goal, we know that the officiating, to be as kind as I possibly can here, definitely left something to be desired, not just in that series, but in the entire playoffs. So once that goal was scored, I had to make sure they're not going to call some like BS goalie interference or like a hand pass. Or they were offside.
We remember like Game 1 in that series, John. We remember.
Oh yeah, that was rough. And oh man, that made me so mad, because I mean, what a moment for Kakko and Chytil there, and that they had it taken away from them. But yeah, it is what it is. They still got the series win, and talking about all this, I'm hoping. I mean, the Rangers got to make it first. I think they will, but it just makes me look so forward to Stanley Cup playoff hockey. And I mean, I figure we can call it there for today, guys. But I mean, it's always a pleasure talking hockey. And yeah, if you guys want to do this again this season, I'm all for it.
Absolutely, John. Thank you again for sharing this with us, brother. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining. And also, where can they find you guys, the Broadway Block podcast, and where can they find you guys on social media?
We are on Broadway Spotify podcasts and Apple Podcasts.
Yeah,
and Broadway Block Twitter, where we keep it spicy.
There it is. Good stuff. All right. Well, yeah, again, Joe, Steve, thanks again for joining. And Ranger fans, thanks for tuning in. And we will definitely see you guys next time.
Cheers, buddy.
Sounds good, John. Thank you.
All right, so once again, a huge thanks to Joe and Stevie from the Broadway Block Podcast for teaming up for this special New York Rangers crossover edition here, 2-part crossover edition. Definitely make sure to follow both of those guys on Twitter, follow Broadway Block on Twitter as well, and give them a listen. They really do a fantastic job covering this team. I believe they're closing in on 75 episodes, and I highly recommend it to anyone. I do check out some of the other Ranger podcasts from time to time, and Broadway Block is up there as far as, one of the absolute best. So definitely give them a listen as well. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.